Despite the initial desire of Johns Hopkins and Clark universities to concentrate on graduate studies, the American model for graduate education quickly became one of graduate schools layered on undergraduate colleges of arts and sciences, served by a single faculty and governed by a central administration. Graduate deans were relatively toothless because they could not hire or fire faculty or raise and control their own funds. The greater numbers and importance of undergraduates were strong reminders that teaching and the preparation of graduate students for teaching were not to be subsumed by research alone. Yet spotty collegiate preparation required remedial attention and compromised graduate standards. Moreover, America's all-service universities, particularly after the implementation of the Morrill Land-Grant Act of 1861, were soon obliged, unlike the German universities, to blend pure and applied studies and to award doctorates or other advanced degrees in a mounting variety of professional programs and schools. Major increases in graduate enrollments before and throughout the 20th century led to dramatic reductions in the award of honorary degrees, particularly the MA and even the Doctor of Divinity. They also spawned a confusing plethora of specialized programs, degrees, gowns, and hoods. By 1903, Harvard philosopher William James was complaining publicly about the stranglehold on academic life of the PhD octopus, which degree was fast becoming the recognized union card for all professors, even if they were destined only for undergraduate teaching. In 1950, some 438 institutions awarded more than 50,000 MAs and nearly 5,300 PhDs, not a few to returning veterans on the GI Bill. And since 1920, just 30 years, while undergraduate enrollments increased tenfold, graduate enrollments had grown 50-fold, despite the Great Depression and a Second World War. The biggest rates of increase were in doctorates, and the biggest increases were made in a relatively small number of large research universities. These had developed a monopoly on doctorates as most colleges traded graduate ambitions to become gatekeepers to the nation's graduate and professional schools. As of 1935, more than half of all PhDs in history had been granted by just 6 universities: Columbia, Harvard, Chicago, Wisconsin, Johns Hopkins, and Penn. The impetus to create graduate departments in schools at such a pace and on such a scale was manifold. The biggest jolt was supplied by competitive American juices. Some colleges and normal schools wanted to become universities, and universities wanted to be bigger and better than their peers. Neither could do so, they thought, by teaching only undergraduates. Land-grant and other public universities were also programmed to serve their states or regions by building and staffing knowledge-based industries, and by lending intelligence to a broad variety of civic problems and needs. Beginning in the 1920s, rankings of graduate programs upped the ante in research university prestige and pride games. And even earlier, faculty used the presence or absence and the perceived quality of graduate programs as bargaining chips in their increasingly mobile searches for advancement. Predictably, the impressive growth of homegrown doctorates was not immune to criticism. The organization in 1900 of the American Association of Universities, an expandable group of 14 elite research universities, was the main force for quality control in the opening decades of the last century. In general, it sought to raise the opinion entertained abroad of America's doctorates by promoting greater uniformity in standards for graduate admissions and degrees, and by pulling up those of the country's so-called weaker institutions. Initially, the member universities' presidents ran the show, but soon many began to send their graduate deans in their places to the national meetings. In 1949, the deans founded the Association of Graduate Schools under the AAU umbrella to focus on ongoing concerns other than relations with the federal government which since the 1930s had preoccupied the presidents. The deans and other educators' concerns about America's graduate schools have been numerous and persistent. In 1899, President G. Stanley Hall of 10-year-old all-graduate Clark University drew up a long list that retains its relevance 113 years later. What was on it and what's still on ours? One issue is the perennial conflict between quantity and quality. Do we reach down into the applicant pool every year because the quality runs deep, or because we need teaching assistants to give the students in our large lecture courses some personal contact and opportunities for discussion? Do we increase the size of our entering classes because there are too many jobs going unfulfilled, or because we want to produce more ego-flattering clones of ourselves? Do we carefully plan for growth, or do we just grow like Topsy on the assumption that bigger is somehow more prestigious? Do we even entertain the possibility of cutting our graduate enrollments or abolishing certain graduate programs altogether? Another persistent bugbear is what we expect or are expected to produce: scholar teachers or teacher scholars. Do we still assume that all of our PhDs will or should teach in colleges and universities? Or are we flexible and imaginative enough to prepare all or some of them for careers outside the academy? If we put our heaviest or just more emphasis on preparation for teaching, what happens to our Teutonic fetish for research seminars and thick dissertations? Or is our research training, as we have long claimed, crucial and appropriate for intellectual careers both in and outside the academy? And if it's not, can we reform it to make it so? Three related quandaries follow depending on our answers to the previous questions. The first is, should the pursuit of the PhD be strictly vocational? Is there still room for those who are simply interested in learning more about the past, whatever uses that knowledge might be put to? And if so, should we feel equally responsible for helping both groups to find jobs? The second dilemma is how to balance our curricular requirements between research specialization and liberal breadth, discovery and education, restriction and freedom. Are we sure we need all of our residence requirements, language exams, TA-ships, major and minor fields, prelims, comprehensive exams, dissertation defenses, and the expectation of publications before graduation? Could we reduce the prolonged time to degree and its incurrence of career-numbing debt by some careful pruning, particularly in dissertation length and even in type of final product? A third conundrum is how to prepare our doctoral candidates for future collaboration as public historians in complex organizations and as academics, many of whom eschew committee work, team teaching, and co-authorship so they can reign solo over their time, classrooms, and libraries. Can we temper, not eradicate, but temper the rugged individualism and competitiveness of graduate school to make room for cooperative endeavors in the classroom and out that will carry weight with future employers and give our discipline a greater claim to public attention and funding? And how, in our hermetic departments, can we encourage interdisciplinary as well as technological exploration and collaboration without shortcoming our own rich, time-tested methods and materials? Finally, there's the looming question of what we can do as individuals, departments, institutions, and a professional organization about the latest job crisis. There have been several in just the last century. Even in the late 19th century, new PhDs from both America and Germany were not always successful in landing the academic jobs they hoped or thought they deserved. One Leipzig and Johns Hopkins educated classicist had to wait 12 years to begin what he called his real-life work in college or university. Underfunded universities, resistance to uber specialization, stubborn regional and national prejudices, and incumbent self-interest all played a role in stymieing newly hooded doctors. In the two world wars, the Great Depression, and the persistent 2008 recession, reduced demand was the main problem. In the early 1900s, late 20s, mid-50s, and pretty much since 1970, oversupply was the primary culprit. One fly in the ointment, of course, were the federal fundings in 1986 and 1994 that uncapped the mandatory retirement of college and university professors. The latest recession, which has caused many aging professors to postpone retirement, has only made matters worse all the time. After taking a long view of graduate education, I'm not very sanguine about our ability to either predict or prevent periodic disjunctions between the supply of, particularly in the humanities and social sciences. The crux is that we simply cannot predict major downturns in the economy, which affect demand. Even the economists can't, and their academic trend lines mirror ours. Equally important is that we have an extremely decentralized non-system of higher education. In a competitive climate of rankings and relative prestige, precious few universities are willing to take the first step toward reducing their graduate enrollments, because reduction smacks of entropy and loss of face. Some governors, trustees, and state boards of higher education seem much less reluctant to do that. Together, these two conditions make it very difficult for our national disciplines to adjust quickly to job candidate misalignments. In the last major one, beginning in 1984, for instance, it took 8 years to adjust the supply upward to meet unusual demand. And we still haven't managed to significantly reduce the supply since 1992 to cope with the sharp drop in demand, or to enlarge the demand by reconfiguring our goals, methods, and products. It's clear from our academic history that our university structures and professional academic tracks, well formed early in the last century, change only slowly. We are set in our ways because in the main, they were in the beginning and have remained for a very long time reasonably successful, if not always efficient. But the changes we have seen of late in student demography, rising costs, mounting debts, the ecology of knowledge, the blurring and blending of disciplines, the technological possibilities of research and of teaching, leaps in our understanding of the learning process, and the reconfiguration of the national and global workforce all demand that we in graduate education think harder about what we do, how we do it, and why. We can change without losing our souls or our strength, and we must if we care about the future health of our discipline and of higher education as a whole. And I'm sure Rob and Tom and many of you will have plenty of suggestions for how we can proceed.